My name is Carrie Zimmer, and I'm originally from the United States, and I'm a teacher here in Dubai.
Okay. How long have you been teaching for?
This is year 22, and if you
Nice.
can believe that. I'm not really sure how we've gotten to this point in my career where I'm on the sliding into the back half, hopefully. So, 22 years.
Awesome, awesome. Okay, so I saw a post on Instagram of you. For me, it looked like you were being very organized. And I was like, wow, what is that? So my first question is, do you consider yourself to be organized?
Yes.
Yes.
I'm probably on the continuum of organization on the extreme end of things. So I am an organized person, but it's also, I think, a little bit of organized chaos.
Mhm.
I do allow for some amount of flexibility, but the spontaneity is not really one of my strong suits, and it's definitely something I rely on other people to bring into my life. But the organization part, that's my jam.
So how did that begin, or have you always been organized?
I mean, I think I've always been organized. Even when I was growing up, I was like being a teacher as a game, or, playing school, and you organize things in that sense. So I've always been a bit of an organizer. I love data and having it make it fit in different ways and getting to look at it. And then over time, I kind of was exposed to some different people in education and other fields that were representing data in visual ways instead of just like charts of numbers and Excel spreadsheets, and tried to think about using that in my classroom and in my own life, and really never had a lot of success with it until it kind of just happened by chance this year, a little more. Something that when I looked at it, I was like, oh, now I've started doing what I've seen other people doing. So I had seen people making beautiful journals and organizing information about their lives, but I had never been able to find a way that I could manage it on a daily basis until I just started tracking a few things by accident in January. And when January was over, I looked at it and I said, well, I think you just found a way that you've been tracking your own data. And so that kind of spurred on a little more each month this year.
Walk us through some of the things that you started tracking and how that came to be.
Sure. When I think about visualizing data, one of the people that inspired me is a teacher named Carrie Beasley on Twitter. And she did a talk about this at a conference a few years ago. And so I'd always been inspired by that. And she recommended a book to me of two women who each week picked a set of data to track, and they would find a way to represent it on a postcard. And they would send this postcard to each other in their respective cities. And so I just always thought that what they had done was so cool. It was like the number of smiles they received, or the number of hugs, or how many minutes it took them to get to work. And so they were representing data in all these cool different lines, circles, flowers, shapes, and everything. So I had a calendar that I bought over Christmas break, and I used it to start marking down what I did each day, with a few goals of trying to remind myself to do some things that I wanted to fill my days with, because I think one of the things that people experience, especially with busy jobs, is that you get to the end of the weekend and you're wondering, where did my weekend go? And you binged a whole season on Netflix, but you don't know what else you did. And I got to feeling a little tired of that feeling, where I didn't know where all my time had gone, and I wanted to, even if I was going to binge watch a series on Netflix, know that I accomplished some other things. For me, a lot of it is seeing that I finish things, even though you might know you've done it, but now I have a visual representation of that. And so I picked a few things like drinking a certain amount of water, practicing a few things from my gym that are goals of mine, push-ups, handstand kick-ups, and making sure I hit my food targets for what I eat every day, because I track my macros. And so different things like that, and I would start making different shapes or symbols of whether or not I did them and put them on the calendar. And that way at the end of the month I could count and see if I met goals I set or how many times I had done something. And now each month, then at the beginning of the month, I sit down and I pick out what things I want to focus on, or what things I think that I enjoy, and like making sure I make time for them, because I think that's part of it too, is that if you have things that you really like to do, but you don't make time for them, then there must not be that important to you. And so this allows me to think about which things are important and give myself the time to actually spend on them.
Nice. So take us through maybe your monthly or your weekly preparation for your goals and being able to track this data.
When I usually do the tracking by month right now. There are plenty of people that do it by week, and I think either would be fine for anyone getting started. I like to do it by the month just because I have a monthly calendar, and I have certain, like a set of things that are kind of daily goals that are like the drinking water and hitting my macro targets. And then I have some things that are just more like as I can over the course of a month. So I kind of pick out those things that I think I want to work on. And each month it's a little different. So I've been working on doing more Zoom chats with my friends that live around the world. And I like put that on my calendar because we all think about talking to our friends, and sometimes you actually need to have a goal of like getting it done, because before you know it, months and months have slipped by and you haven't talked to any of them. So I put that on there, and just kind of thinking about the things over the month that I want to work on. And so for April, I've been working again on kicking up to handstands faster, and I've been working on making sure I get a certain amount of running sessions in, and that I try to get 30-minute walks in. So a lot of my goals are fitness related, but I think for each person it just depends on what's important to you. It could simply be as simple as how much screen time you're doing, where you just track the amount of shows you watch, and you just so you know, even if it's something you want to reduce, and that way once you start to look at it, then you can know more of what you're actually doing. So I also track the genres of books that I read, because first I just think it looks really cool, but it is really interesting that I can track how many female authors I'm reading, if I'm reading more females than males, if I'm reading books that are all fiction, or if I'm reading historical fiction, or they're all a certain genre. So it's been really interesting to get to see the books that I naturally choose, and that way it can also help you, like if you wanted to read more books in science fiction or fantasy, you can easily look at my chart and see how much you've read of that, and try to branch out and explore different types of things. And I think that's the real point of maybe tracking your data, is just so that you can look at it in a different way. And when you start to track data, then by looking at it and having it in front of you, you're able to make conclusions for yourself, and then decide how to move forward. So at the end of a month, if I was really successful with something and it feels good, maybe you don't need to track it again. Or maybe you do track it just because you know it helps keep you on, or you finish this and now you're ready for the next step. And so it's just a matter of, what do you want to work on for that week or that month, and putting it on paper so that you're holding yourself accountable for that time. All right, so this is the book that I had seen about the visual data. It's by Giorgio Lupi and Stephanie Pozovic. And so they, for example, wrote postcards to each other. And this week here was about phone addiction. So they found a way to track how they were using their phone, and the colors and the bits mean all different things. But I just thought that this was a really amazing way, but it seemed like a lot to do on a regular basis. But I've always was really inspired by this. So in January, I started with a calendar like this. And I just started by choosing some symbols for different things. So for example, handstand practices, practicing my double unders, going to CrossFit. So doing some different things that all had little symbols. And over the course of the month, each day I would just track it. And after I finished this month, that's when I realized, oh, well, you kind of did a visual data tracking system. And so using that idea, then I moved on to another month where I picked some different things. And you can see in February, I got a little bit more organized with my tracking. And I had certain goals, and I was trying to hit certain numbers. And then as time went on, then I did the same thing in March. And still had numbers on my different systems, and to be honest, for me, that even started to feel like it had a lot of pressure associated with it. And so each month changes a little bit for me as I track. And in April, I dropped all of the numbers and any kind of time expectations and just put the things on here I wanted to focus on, so that at the end of the month I can see how many times I was able to make time for something. Now, some of them are daily goals, like all of my things with triangles are daily goals. In terms of the top 4 things, and then others are just as many times as I can over the course of a month. So instead of a calendar, you can also just use a simple little journal that I bought at the store. And so I have a daily gratitude that I started tracking in February, and just tried to make something where there would be space to do several months at one time. And so each day I write down something that I'm grateful for. And then I also started tracking my year-end books. And this is something my students are doing at school as well. And on the left side, I made a key so that each different genre that I might read has a different pattern or color. And then the same thing is true as each book I read or finish, then I mark it over here. I distinguish between audiobooks, whether it's a male or female author, if the author is a person of color, just trying to make sure that my reading over the course of the year is diversified. And this way you can see it much more easily what you've been reading. You can see there's a lot of fiction. And like this is an example of the way that I tracked my 100 push-ups in March. Each day was a different color, and I started at the top and went left to right, and each square was 10. And so each day I just tried to do as many as I could, or some days I did a lot, and other days a few less, and alternated until I got all the way to 1,000. And so push-ups on your toes. No, the one thing that's really important, or I think to think about, is that a lot of people think that the tracking that I do might look like it makes things too organized or too regimented, and it's too much for them to follow. And there's someone on Instagram, and he's an author, it's called James Clear, and I just found his Instagram account a few weeks ago, and one of his quotes was, "Habits don't restrict freedom, they create it." And so by tracking your habits, you organize the things that you want to do so that you have time for other things. And I think that's a pretty powerful way to look at a system of tracking, and it could be for one thing or 3 things. So tips for getting started would be to decide if you want to track weekly or monthly, what would work best for you, and simply find like a calendar or a grid or something simple. You could use any journal or notebook, and just think about what it is you want to track. Maybe you just want to track the water that you're drinking daily, and it's not even on a calendar. You just make on a little gridded notebook, a little chart, and fill out what's important to you. So you would find where you're going to track, and find, maybe 2 to 5 things that you want to kind of start to keep track of, and think about how those, what you want it to look like when you track it. Are you going to use a little shape? Are you going to use a grid or a continuum where you can fill squares in? Last month I did 1,000 push-ups, and so every day, every 10 push-ups I colored in a square, and tried to fill in the whole cube or the whole grid over the course of the month. So there's really a lot of freedom, and it's kind of just what works for each person. But I think if you focus on what is important to you and pick those couple of things to get started, and just, whether it's a little shape or a symbol, start marking it down each day, the things that you've done.